Reportedly, the Dutch government has a plan to confiscate farms to counter climate change. The EU approved it, and some say the US has similar plans. But wait, is that true? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Countries across the world are scrambling to get ahead of climate change. To do so, they're putting all sorts of interesting policies in place. For example, earlier this month, the European Union gave the green light to a Dutch plan to buy out farmers in order to cut emissions. No farms, no emissions, no problem. No food, you say? Psh, we'll have that lab-grown meat in no time. When the news site The European Conservative reported this news, though, they phrased it a little differently. They said Brussels backed forced buyouts of Dutch farmers. And there are reports that something similar might be happening in the US. But is that what's really happening? It's time for another edition of Wait, is that true? Let's start with the Netherlands. Is the Dutch government forcing Dutch farmers to sell their land? Well, it's complicated. To give you context, the Netherlands is a major agricultural powerhouse that feeds the world. With over 100 million livestock, it is the largest meat exporter in Europe and the second largest exporter of food globally by value after the United States. It also has the highest livestock density in the world, which is a huge problem for the Netherlands. They have tons of emissions entering the atmosphere, and not just from Amsterdam. The Netherlands has the second highest level of nitrogen on agricultural land in Europe, behind Cyprus. And according to Science magazine, Dutch agriculture is responsible for nearly half of the nitrogen pollution that falls in the country. Most of that comes from fertilizer runoff and ammonia fumes from animal manure and urine, since ammonia is partially made up of nitrogen. According to the Energy Monitor, an excess of these particles can lead to acid rain, deterioration of the soil, groundwater pollution, and biodiversity loss. Although it has less nitrogen now compared to 30 years ago, the Netherlands' nitrogen levels have not significantly decreased since 2010. In 2015, the Netherlands introduced a nitrogen permit system to reduce nitrogen in all sectors, not just agriculture, but its nitrogen level is still way over the European Union's threshold, especially in Dutch nature protection areas. The Dutch government wants to comply with the European Court of Justice's 2018 ruling and the Netherlands Council of State's 2019 ruling, both of which push the government to do more to reduce emissions. And as everyone knows, the government is great at solving problems. Governments are almost as good at solving problems as Helen Keller was at Guitar Hero. This is why the Dutch government last year laid out targets for reducing nitrogen pollution in some areas by up to 70% by 2030. How? Well, the year before that, the government said that it would need to reduce livestock by 30%. And no, not by a series of hot dog eating competitions, though. That would be the most delicious solution. No, instead the government was going to make it happen, and not in a way that would make anyone happy. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. The Dutch government set a target to reduce the country's nitrogen pollution by up to 70% by 2030. Part of that plan included reducing livestock by 30%. To hit their targets, the Dutch government estimated that over 11,000 farms would have to close, and another 17,000 plus farmers would have to significantly reduce their livestock. For that to happen, the Dutch government planned to buy out farmers. Either that or relocate farms or make farms more sustainable. Theoretically, the emissions reduction efforts would be voluntary. But in June of 2022, the Dutch Minister for Nature and Nitrogen said that she hadn't ruled out buying out farmers by force. Meaning, we would have to change the lyrics of the song Old MacDonald to say he had a farm until big government got involved. This really made farmers angry and ignited major protests last year. Not only were farmers' livelihoods at stake, but so were people connected to them, like veterinarians and suppliers. So loads of rural Dutch people took to the streets in protest. In response to the Dutch government's moves, protesters blocked supermarkets, put hay on the highways, sprayed the police with I don't know what, but I don't want to know, and burned manure. Wow, I can't think of a more appropriate video to show my grandkids when they ask what the 2020s were like. Many of the protesters had doubts about the climate crisis and saw the Dutch government's move as an assault on people's way of living, especially families that have been in the farming business for generations. Not to mention all those poor folks on Farmers Only. Now they're going to have to date city folk? They just don't get it. That's the catchphrase. The protests drew a lot of support from sympathizers around the world. It even got the attention of then Fox News host Tucker Carlson and former President Donald Trump.
The climate crisis hoax is even risking famine and starvation. As we speak, farmers in the Netherlands, of all places, are courageously opposing the climate tyranny of the Dutch government. Can you believe this?
But the Dutch government didn't back down. According to Dutch news, compulsory buyouts were still on the table as of November last year, which is when Fox News reported that the Netherlands were set to forcibly close roughly 3,000 farms. Meanwhile, The Guardian put it a little differently, saying that up to 3,000 peak polluters had been given their last chance to close. But then, in March of this year, there was an election. The new Dutch Farmers' Party won a lot of support and started negotiations with the rest of the government. They especially opposed compulsory buyouts, which the government has mooted. That means that mandatory buyouts are off the table, at least for now, at least according to this source, which means that the policy the EU just okayed is now a voluntary buyout program. Farmers can sell their land to the Dutch government if they want to, or they can refuse. The government is reportedly offering up to 120% of the farm's value, so I'm sure at least some farmers will decide to sell. Still, mandatory buyouts were on the table for a long time, and people around the world were rightly suspicious. The Dutch protests resonated with a lot of people in the US who distrust climate change agendas, especially from the government and global elites. Some of those people saw the Netherlands as a warning of what climate change activists have in store for Americans next.
You'll be next. In our movement, we stand against the climate fanatics. We stand with the peaceful Dutch farmers who are bravely fighting for their freedom. It's horrible what's happening.
So, is the U.S. next? I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. Last year, the Netherlands laid out a plan to buy out and close 3,000 farms and require emission cuts as high as 95% in some provinces. Good luck with that in Amsterdam. And the EU recently okayed 2 Dutch plans to pay $1.6 billion to buy out livestock farmers. Until recently, the Dutch government was floating the idea of making these buyouts mandatory. The EU approval came just a few days before U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, made a speech at the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate Summit. So, of course, it got all mixed together into a huge globalist conspiracy. Confiscating farms? John Kerry? More like John Commie. This conspiracy has been promoted by Dutch journalist Eva Vlaardingerbroek. With what's been going on in the Netherlands, it's not surprising that people are suspicious. But is this really happening? Not so much. Certainly front and center in the Biden administration's agenda is tackling climate change, or as John Kerry calls it, the climate crisis, or as sensationalist news sites call it, climate apocalypse-ageddon. Just like the EU, one way Kerry wants to tackle the environment is by focusing on agriculture, which is why Kerry recently spoke at the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate Summit to get people to take action in agriculture. Kerry wasn't always 100% accurate with what he said, however. For example, he said this.
A lot of people have no clue that agriculture contributes about 33% of all the emissions of the world.
33%? Wow, I had no idea that corn and green beans love driving gas-guzzling SUVs so much. But that's not quite right. The 33% figure comes from a 2021 study published in the Nature Food Journal, which says the global food system, which includes land use, agricultural production, packaging, transportation, and waste management, generates about 18 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. But According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, agriculture alone actually generates about 10 to 12% of greenhouse gas emissions. So next time my doctor tells me my all-Twinkie diet is unhealthy, I get to say, you know what? It is healthy for the environment. I don't eat vegetables because I'm a conservationist. Anyway, this is why Kerry wants to put agriculture front and center as part of the solution to the climate crisis.
And we can't get to net zero. We don't get this job done unless agriculture is front and center as part of the solution. Emissions from the food system alone are projected to cause another 0.5 degree of warming by mid-century on the current course that we are today.
Not to mention warming emissions that come from eating certain foods, like beans. Turns out they aren't such a magical fruit. Kerry goes on to talk about how there needs to be innovation to improve agriculture while also combating the climate crisis. He advocates technological, social, and policy solutions. But Kerry never made any mention of farm confiscations during the summit or in any other public setting, as far as we're aware. It's unclear where the People's Voice article quoted Kerry saying anything like that, or what exactly he said was not off the table. The article makes no citation. Many other websites and forums picked up on this headline and copied it, assuming that what the article said was true. Because as everyone knows, if it's on the internet, it has to be true. I'm pretty sure Jesus said that first. They didn't even bother doing their homework. That's just lazy research and copy and paste writing. And again, that's pretty popular among freelance writers these days. People are just assuming that he's going to confiscate land because he wants governments to step in to lower agriculture emissions. Is it tinfoily? Perhaps, especially since there's no proof at the moment that Kerry seriously contemplates using farm confiscations to solve the climate crisis. But people should always be wary of the government trying to grab more power, especially because would it be possible to restrict people's ability to grow their own food in the U.S. in the name of climate change? There is a chance. It may come as a surprise to you, but as much as the U.S. loves freedom and rights, there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that protects Americans' right to grow and sell their own food, even for something as simple as plants in one's own front yard. I did a whole episode on it. Check it out. Link is below. But yeah, I'm not constitutionally protected to grow my own Twinkies. It's not dangerous. All you have to do to grow Twinkies is pour plutonium on planted platypus eggs. Read the ingredients, people. There are already a lot of restrictions in place, such as restrictions against selling raw milk or selling seeds. Very few states have amended their own constitutions to make food sovereignty a right. And even then, some like Florida and Illinois only guarantee protections for gardens, not meat and dairy. But no one will have any objections if you decide to grow and eat bugs instead. If that's the best alternative they can come up with, then I welcome the oncoming climate apocalypse-ageddon. So what do you think of climate action in agriculture? Leave your comments below. And remember that we rely mainly on direct support from viewers like you. If you want to help us deliver nonpartisan news, all it takes is as little as $1 per episode over on our crowdfunding website, Patreon. Visit patreon.com/America Uncovered for more. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.